Get that mutt out of here! This is a funeral, not a circus! The man in the black overcoat barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the icy wind that rolled across the cemetery. The mourners turned, startled, their heads swiveling toward the source of the chaos. A dog, a scrappy, golden-brown mutt with a torn ear and mud-caked fur, was digging furiously at the base of a freshly covered grave. Dirt sprayed in all directions. The headstone read, Amelia R. Whitmore, beloved. Sister and friend, the dog didn't care. He growled low, frantic, possessed by something no one understood. His claws tore through the wet soil, his chest heaving with each shove. Some guests gasped. Others stepped back, unsure if they were watching madness or something far more chilling. Among the shocked mourners stood a girl no older than 10, her hair tied back with a faded pink ribbon. Her name was Elsie Whitmore, Amelia's niece. She wasn't crying like the others. Instead, she stared at the dog, wide-eyed, frozen. "That's Buck," she whispered, barely audible. "Aunt Amelia's dog. But he disappeared 2 weeks ago." Buck had vanished the night Amelia died. No one could find him, not even after days of searching. They assumed he had run off in grief, but now here he was, covered in burrs, ribs showing, eyes wild. And he was tearing into her grave. "Somebody stop him!" barked the funeral director, stepping forward. But Buck bared his teeth, snarling deep in his throat. It wasn't aggression, it was desperation. Elsie stepped in front of the adults before anyone could grab him. "Wait," she said firmly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. "He's trying to tell us something." People hesitated. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Finally, a young groundskeeper named Theo approached with cautious steps. He crouched beside the grave, his hands up in surrender. "Easy, boy. Let me help." To everyone's astonishment, Buck stopped digging. He looked at Theo, gave a sharp bark, and then stepped aside, panting, watching. Theo hesitated for a breath, then began digging with his hands where Buck had left off. Inches down, his fingers hit something that wasn't soil. It was wood, the casket. Whispers turned into gasps. "What is this?" someone cried. "Why is he digging up the coffin?" But no one moved to stop him. Theo scraped back the last of the dirt and hesitated. His hand hovered over the lid, heart pounding. Then he placed his fingers on the seam and pushed. The coffin creaked and moved. From inside, gasps turned into screams. The lid didn't open fully, but it shifted enough. Just enough for Theo to see it. A hand, pale, twitching, alive. Theo stumbled back, yelling, "Call an ambulance!" "Now!" Buck barked furiously, circling the grave as if to say, "Hurry!" The funeral turned into chaos. People scattered, some crying, others praying, a few frozen in place. And through it all, Elsie stood still, her small hands clutched over her heart, staring at the casket with tears finally welling in her eyes. "Aunt Amelia's alive," she whispered. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The impossible had just become real, and no one at that funeral would ever forget the dog who dug up a grave, not to desecrate it, but to save the woman buried inside. Because Buck hadn't disappeared. He had been watching, waiting, and when no one else believed the truth, he had come back to dig it up. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but to Elsie, it felt like hours. The cemetery that had been silent in mourning now buzzed with chaos and urgency. Flashing lights bounced off headstones, and the crisp air smelled of overturned earth and something electric in the air, like fate being rewritten. The grave had been fully uncovered now. The casket, once sealed and believed to carry only the weight of death, had been carefully pried open by the responders. Inside, Amelia Whitmore's frail form trembled beneath a velvet-lined lid, her lips parted in weak gasps, her eyes fluttering open as if surfacing from a nightmare. One of the medics whispered, "She's alive," his voice cracking in disbelief. The others sprang into action, checking her vitals, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Buck barked and tried to follow, but Elsie knelt beside him, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck. "You saved her, Buck," she whispered. "You really did." The moment wasn't just emotional, it was unexplainable, but questions came quickly. Why was Amelia breathing? How was she still alive after being declared dead? The doctors later would speak of a rare condition, catalepsy, a neurological phenomenon that mimics death so precisely that even trained physicians could miss the signs. Her heartbeat had slowed to a whisper, her breathing nearly absent. She had been buried alive, and no one had known. No one, except her dog. At the hospital, Amelia's condition remained fragile. She was in and out of consciousness, too weak to speak. Elsie and her mother, Claire, waited outside her room while doctors ran tests. Claire paced the corridor, still shaken. This could have been a disaster, she said to Dr. Marsh, the physician who had signed Amelia's death certificate. It already was, he replied softly, but somehow that dog stopped it. Meanwhile, the town buzzed with whispers and media attention. Reporters crowded the hospital parking lot. "Hero Dog Saves Woman from Grave" was the headline splashed across local news sites. Buck, however, didn't seem to care for the spotlight. He sat quietly beside Elsie, occasionally glancing toward Amelia's door, his ears twitching as, if listening for the heartbeat only he had sensed beneath the earth. Theo, the young groundskeeper who helped uncover the grave, was still shaken. "I've worked in that cemetery 5 years, he told Claire. "I've seen dogs come and go, but the way that one stared at that grave, it wasn't random. It was like he knew she wasn't gone." Claire nodded, her eyes red. He was hers. She raised him since he was a pup. They were never apart, but not everyone was convinced. A man named Vincent Ward, Amelia's estranged cousin, emerged from the shadows of the family, asking uncomfortable questions. "Why was she buried so quickly?" he demanded. "Was there any will? Any insurance? And who benefits if she stays?" "In a coma." Claire's face paled. "You're suggesting this was on purpose?" He shrugged. "I'm suggesting not everything is as innocent as it looks, including that mutt." That night, as Buck rested in the waiting room, a nurse found him licking the doorknob of Amelia's room. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. But he simply stared at the door again, still listening. Inside the room, machines beeped steadily, and for the first time in hours, Amelia stirred. Her eyes opened, slow and heavy, and her lips moved. "Elsie," she whispered. The nurse rushed to call the family, and within minutes, Claire and Elsie were by her side. Amelia's voice was hoarse but clear. "I wasn't dead," she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I tried to scream, I tried to move, but I couldn't. Only Buck knew." Claire broke down in tears. "How did this happen to you?" But Amelia shook her head. "I don't know. I remember lying down in bed, then waking up in darkness. Cold, wood walls, no air. I thought I was in a nightmare." Her voice cracked. "Until I heard digging, scratching, and barking." At the foot of the bed, Buck's ears perked up at her voice. His tail thumped once against the tile floor, and then he rested his head down again, as if satisfied. Amelia smiled faintly. "He didn't give up on me." The doctors soon confirmed her recovery would take time, but her mind was intact. And as the truth became clear, so did something else. Buck hadn't just saved a life. He'd saved a truth from being buried forever. The next day, as the town gathered in front of the hospital for a press conference, Buck stood quietly beside Elsie, wearing a blue ribbon around his neck. The mayor cleared his throat. "We honor bravery in many forms," he said. "But today, we honor a creature whose loyalty transcended logic. A dog who heard what none of us could, and refused to be ignored." The crowd applauded. Some cried. Buck blinked once at the sound, then turned his gaze back to the hospital window, where Amelia lay smiling, her hand raised weakly in thanks. But behind the applause, questions still lingered. Why was Amelia declared dead? And why was someone in the family so eager to move on? Because what came next wasn't just about survival. It was about what had been buried, and what Buck was about to help uncover. For a small town like Marigold Springs, news traveled faster than any car on its cracked country roads. By the next morning, everyone had heard of the dog that dug up a coffin and the woman who wasn't quite dead. But what they hadn't heard yet was the growing unease inside the hospital, behind closed doors, where Amelia's fragmented memory painted a far darker picture than anyone was prepared for. Claire stood at her daughter's bedside, clutching a cup of untouched coffee. Amelia's face was pale, her eyes hollow, but her voice had begun to return. "I remember the smell first," she whispered, "like damp soil and roses. I thought it was a dream at first. Then I tried to move and realized I couldn't. My hands wouldn't respond. My legs were numb." Her voice cracked. "Then I screamed, or tried to, but there was nothing, just silence in a box." Elsie had to leave the room when she heard that part. The idea that her aunt had been lying conscious in a coffin was too much. She found Buck curled up on a chair in the waiting room, one eye open, watching the door like a soldier on duty. "You knew," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Somehow you knew." At that same moment, Vincent Ward sat across from a hospital administrator, his expression calm, but his tone sharp. "If you don't mind, I'd like access to Amelia's estate records," he said. "As next of kin, I have a legal right." The administrator stopped him. "Amelia is alive, Mr. Ward. That means she retains all legal rights to her estate." Vincent smiled tightly. For now, what no one outside the family knew was that Amelia had recently changed her will, removing Vincent entirely after a falling out involving her late husband's land. Vincent hadn't taken it well, and now, as he paced the halls with a legal pad tucked beneath his arm, some part of him hoped Amelia wouldn't regain enough strength to finalize anything further. Back in her room, Amelia took a slow breath and asked the nurse for paper and a pen. With trembling hands, she wrote down a short sentence and gave it to Claire. It read, "Someone injected me." Claire stared at the words, stunned. "Are you sure?" Amelia nodded slowly. "I felt the prick. It was right before everything went black, and it wasn't my regular doctor." Claire's mind spun. Could it have been Vincent, or someone he paid? What kind of person would fake a death, bury a living woman for money? Elsie returned, her eyes puffy from crying. She handed Buck a piece of ham from a vending machine sandwich, then looked at her mother. "She wrote something?" Claire nodded, passing her the note. When Elsie read it, her breath caught in her throat. "We have to go to the police," but Amelia gripped her mother's hand weakly. "Not yet," she whispered. "They'll need proof. We don't have any yet." Her lips trembled. "Let me remember more." Meanwhile, back at the cemetery, Theo the groundskeeper had returned. Something about the scene still gnawed at him. He stood near the grave, now filled in but marked off with caution tape. As he scanned the area, something caught his eye. Fresh footprints, not just his, deeper ones. He followed them to a patch behind the hedges, where he found a crushed syringe half buried in the mud. His skin went cold. He drove straight to the hospital and handed it to Elsie, explaining everything. She looked at the item, then at Buck, who had perked up again. "We need to show this to someone," she said. "The police need to know." That evening, Officer Malik Rios, the town's only detective, sat with them in a private room. He examined the syringe, then took down Amelia's note and the family's statements. "If this turns out to contain any trace of a sedative or paralytic drug," he said, "we'll have a case for attempted murder." His eyes darkened. "And your cousin might find himself in handcuffs." As Malik left to begin the investigation, Amelia stirred again. This time her words were more vivid. "He came into the room wearing gloves," she said. "I thought he was there to help. He said something about making sure I wouldn't be in pain. Then he injected me." She shivered. "I thought it was medicine, but then everything went dark." Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. "He tried to bury you alive." Amelia looked at Buck, who now sat beside her bed, ears alert. "He didn't let it happen. The family spent that night at the hospital, not wanting to leave." Her sighed. Vincent never returned, but someone else did. Around midnight, a nurse saw Buck leave Amelia's room and wander the hallway. He stopped outside the main exit and growled low. The nurse followed and peeked through the glass. Outside, standing under the parking lot light, was a man in a black coat, Vincent. He looked toward the hospital, then turned and disappeared into the night. Buck didn't chase. He just watched. As if he knew it wasn't over yet, because the story was no longer just about a buried coffin, but about uncovering a buried crime. And Buck was far from finished. Morning crept slowly into the town of Marigold Springs, its quiet streets blanketed in mist. But at Marigold General, the air was anything but calm. Nurse Lillian opened Amelia's chart just after dawn and saw the update scribbled in bold handwriting. "Patient regaining memory. Possible foul play. Notify Officer Rios immediately if new details emerge." Buck, ever faithful, hadn't moved from Amelia's bedside. He slept in short bursts, his ears twitching at every creak of the floor. Even in rest, he was guarding her. Claire sat beside him, brushing Amelia's hair back as the frail woman stirred again. "I remember more," Amelia whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. There was a voice outside the room, a phone call. I think I heard Vincent say, "She won't feel a thing." Then the door opened. Someone else came in. I never saw. Their face just smelled the gloves, latex, and then I was falling into darkness. Claire looked at Elsie. "That means someone else helped him. Someone in scrubs." Elsie stood abruptly. "We need the security footage from the care facility. Right now." Officer Malik Rios had already thought of that. He met them at the administrative office of the retirement care home an hour later. The manager hesitated, citing privacy protocols. but Malik leaned in. A woman was nearly buried alive. Her dog is the only reason we're even having this conversation. Show me the tapes. The grainy footage flickered onto the screen. They scrolled through hours of static and silent movement, watching nurses pass, doors open, nothing suspicious, until a frame paused. There, Elsie pointed. That's Vincent. He was standing near Amelia's room, talking to a man in scrubs. The two shook hands. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., just minutes before Amelia was found unresponsive. Zoom in, Malik said. They couldn't make out the man's face, but the badge glinted. That's a contract nurse. No name, just a partial ID. L. Men. Something. Claire's stomach churned. Do you think he paid him? Malik didn't answer. He didn't have to. Back at the hospital, Buck had gotten up. He paced the hallway as if waiting for something. When Elsie returned, he followed her, tail stiff, ears alert. Amelia's eyes lit up when she saw him, and she reached out weakly to stroke his fur. You saved me, she whispered. You really saved me. It was the first time since her awakening that she smiled. Malik returned that afternoon with a news update that stunned the room. We tracked down the nurse, he said. Leonard Mendoza. He fled the state yesterday morning, but we put out a warrant. And Vincent? He paused. He tried to access your bank accounts again, Amelia, but the freeze was already in place. Amelia shut her eyes, exhaling slowly. He thought I was dead. He made sure of it. What happens now? Elsie asked. Malik nodded. We'll catch them. You have my word. But that night, something even more unexpected happened. A reporter showed up at the hospital, not for Amelia, but for Buck. Word had spread across the internet. The grave-digging German shepherd, the miraculous survival of an elderly woman, the unraveling mystery. It had all gone viral. They called him the dog who knew. Photographers waited outside. Shelter adoption. Offers poured in. TV shows called. Claire declined them all. He's not for show, she said. He's family now. And then, as if the universe agreed, something almost mystical occurred. Amelia sat up the next morning with a strength she hadn't shown in weeks. Her first words were, "Take me home." The doctors objected, but she insisted. Buck barked once in support, and that was the end of it. They wheeled her out of the hospital under the rising sun, with Buck trotting beside her chair, like a soldier escorting his general. At home, Claire set up a bed in the sunroom. Elsie brought flowers, and Buck lay curled up beneath the window, watching her breathe, safe at last. But the final twist came not from the authorities nor the courts, but from Amelia herself. She rewrote her will. This time, everything, her home, her land, her savings, was left to a new foundation, the Buck Trust. Its mission? To fund rescue animals trained for therapy and emergency response. Dogs who could listen, sense danger, and act without waiting for permission, because one dog had done all that. And he hadn't just saved her life. He'd exposed a crime, protected a family, and reminded everyone that instinct and love still carried weight where laws sometimes failed. In the end, Buck didn't need applause. He didn't want cameras, Dee saw. He wanted was a warm spot beside Amelia, and as long as she was breathing, he'd never leave it.